Welcome, everyone. My name is Radha Govil. I'm the Deputy Director at the Peter McMullin Centre on Statelessness. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging that I'm hosting this meeting from Naarm, Melbourne, on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to extend my acknowledgements and respects to elders past and present. And if there are any people of Indigenous heritage joining us today, extend my respects to them as well. So to move then swiftly to our first presenter, who introduced himself already briefly, Aashish is a PhD candidate, recently joined the Peter McMullin Centre, where his research now focuses on addressing the nationality concerns of people displaced by climate change in a protracted or permanent manner. He joined our law school in 2025 after working for 5 years on citizenship deprivation and statelessness in India with a focus on Assam. And during this time, he was an assistant professor and assistant director for the Centre for Public Interest Law at Jindal Global Law School. He has also taught courses on human rights and citizenship at the Université Catholique de Lille and the University of Edinburgh. So welcome, Aashish, and I think you're going to share your presentation from your screen. Thanks.
Super. Thank you, Radha, and it's really nice to be here and see many familiar faces. I hope my presentation's visible. Yeah. And let me begin by acknowledging that I'm also joining from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. Now, as Radha said, I'm sort of really delighted to be here and share what is my proposal at the beginning of my PhD at the McMullin Centre here. And I'm looking at the nationality challenges that emerge during climate change-related displacement. So just sort of starting off, and I thought I would provide an overview of what I've proposed to do here and what I will hopefully spend some time researching and finding more about over the next couple of years. But just to look at the overall context vis-a-vis climate change-related displacement, we know that climate change is a threat multiplier and it is a catalyst for movement, where people who are facing these impacts are highly vulnerable people, and they have been identified by UNHCR as coming from countries which are at the forefront of climate change-related harm. And UNHCR has identified these countries as hosting over half of the world's internally displaced persons, as well as a quarter of stateless persons and refugees. And they're going to face the most severe impacts of climate change by 2030. The impact is felt in largely two manners, which the scholarship speaks about, which is sudden onset disasters and slow onset environmental degradation. Sudden onset disasters such as earthquakes, wildfires, floods, which we see in different contexts, leading to displacement of persons, uprooting of their lives, and making them, compelling them to sort of resettle in other spaces where they may encounter documentation concerns or may fall out of some state apparatuses and not receive support. At the same time, the slow onset degradation involves processes such as salinification of water, such as land slowly becoming not fertile due to drought or due to sort of other concerns. And that also compels people to move in a different migration flow. At the same time, climate change is anticipated to accelerate the sea level rise across the world, which is leading to concerns vis-a-vis territory loss in the Pacific Islands, which I'll come to shortly. But I thought I'd bring up a few examples as well of how climate change-related displacement is already having impacts on nationality. The first example, which Iftikar will later speak about as well, is from Assam, where internal displacement happens every year due to seasonal floods and river erosion, which then impacts people in terms of them having to relocate and not finding government support in updating their documents. And a lot of the exclusions that we've seen in the National Register of Citizens have come from districts where people have face the impacts of river erosion and floods and have had to move because of that. At the same time, the Bangladeshi government has acknowledged this study that I've put up, the displacement solution study, which points out that up to 13% of the coastal land in Bangladesh would be subsumed by 2030. And there are already impacts of this coastal erosion, which is supposedly leading people from Bangladesh to seek asylum in India through regular or irregular routes. Now, the main sort of focus of this research and the scholarship has been in the Pacific Islands, where the palpable threat is felt due to the risk of loss of substantial territory. And that could lead to statelessness if the state does not exist any longer. I'll address that a bit more in a few moments, but I thought I would move to speaking about how does the theoretical framework possibly address this. So I'm looking at this from a normative, from a doctrinal perspective, where I noticed that in the way that people move because of climate change, they face certain concerns at every level, and they are marginalized, where there are categories of persons, such as people who may want to stay and not leave their country of nationality at all. And we see those kinds of perspectives emerging in the Pacific Islands, where people have a very strong connection to land and may not prefer moving or relocating at all. The second category of persons we see is internally displaced persons who may not face any outright or extreme nationality concerns, since they would largely be in the same country, other than facing troubles with documentation. But then the issue starts getting really complex as soon as people move across borders. And that displacement could be short-term or long-term. Now, as soon as people move across borders, are displaced across borders, they are not protected by refugee law, because refugee law's fact-based assessment does not acknowledge climate change as a reason for movement. If people are displaced for a longer term in a protracted or permanent manner, then that's where the risk of statelessness starts arising. And this is also the context in which the Future of Nationality in the Pacific report addresses these issues, where in the Pacific, we see that a lot of national laws of the Pacific Island countries do not support such long-term, protracted or permanent displacement that could happen due to climate change. That due to certain provisions in these laws, what we may notice is that people may stand at the risk of losing their nationality due to residence abroad. They may not have any voting rights if they're not in the physical territory of the country. And they may also not be able to pass the nationality to their children if the children are born outside of the country of nationality. So alongside the passive loss of nationality, what other concerns emerge is that if you think about regions away from the Pacific, where nations may not face the threat of outright complete loss of territory, there would be an issue that the country of nationality may not be able to offer protection to the people who are displaced due to the impacts of climate change. There may be a risk of losing nationality documents during displacement, and there would be some trouble vis-a-vis accessing consular services when it comes to registering the birth of children, which we notice in contexts very briefly in Mozambique after disasters, or in Haiti, or in Somalia. And within this larger context of people displaced due to climate change in a protracted or permanent manner, I argue that children are disproportionately affected because of these challenges in birth registration and restrictive nationality laws, which may leave them at the risk of statelessness. And some of these impacts are also felt in the manner that Central American migrants, because of climate change-linked droughts, have moved to the US. And some research has found out that they have been aware of their circumstances in the sense that they knew they would not be eligible for refugee protection if they were to say they moved because of drought. So they have, in certain circumstances, alleged that they're victims of gang violence and face a security threat in their country of nationality. But sorry, to then put this into the theoretical context that I'm looking at, and the questions that I hope to address are centered around what is the effective nationality of persons displaced in a protected or permanent manner across borders, where such persons would not find any protection under refugee law. They may be eligible for certain human rights protections, which could prohibit their forcible return to their country of nationality, such as complementary protection, which some scholars have identified as a framework in international refugee law, in international human rights law. But such protection does not offer them any legal status. At the same time, their legal status, which is the nationality of the home country, given certain contexts and restrictive nationality laws, may be at the risk as well, where they may end up either being de facto stateless, or in certain circumstances, if their nationality is deprived, or if they're from a country which stands at the risk of losing territory, or, as scholars now argue, may stand at the risk of losing effective government or a permanent population, they may end up being de jure stateless. So does international law provide any solutions here? And scholars have largely argued that unless there is a situation of de jure statelessness, the 1954 Convention does not come into effect, where statelessness law is, and people have identified that sort of does not hold any value in this context. So what can we turn to rather? Perhaps the solution could lie in regional frameworks, such as the ones that we see in the ECOWAS region, or such as the CARICOM, and other such regional mechanisms in Africa, which are being considered, as well as bilateral mechanisms could be a possible solution, where, as Radha mentioned at the beginning, the Falabella Union Treaty between Australia and Tuvalu is an example of offering permanent residence and nationality pathways to nationals of Tuvalu in Australia. And now Vanuatu supposedly wants to reconsider an arrangement they've had with Australia to perhaps have a similar treaty with Australia that Tuvalu does, to host citizens of Vanuatu here. And the third question that I just want to quickly propose is that whether people who are displaced in a protected or permanent manner across borders, do they at some point make any claim? Would they be able to make any claim to the nationality of the host state? Now, international law largely wouldn't support such a claim, or would not possibly give people a right or sort of leave them in a position to demand any nationality from the host state. But scholars in social sciences have been discussing the principle of jus nexi to determine if people start belonging at some point, and if then they should be eligible for grant of nationality. So this is the sort of larger theoretical picture that I've put together so far of where climate change-related displacement has something to say, or has a link with statelessness and nationality. And I hope this provides as a sort of good framework to have more focused discussions in the next two presentations. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Aashish. Clearly a lot to grapple with your upcoming research, but fantastic to see all the different aspects of this area being brought to bear. That's a really great introduction to sort of some of the wide range of issues. As I said, we'll hold questions perhaps to the end. So now I would like to invite Iftikar and Angshuman. So Iftikar belongs to Assam's Bengali Muslim community, and he grew up in Darang district, the place where the Assam movement began, where he witnessed firsthand how people of his community have struggled to prove their citizenship because of lack of effective legal aid. In 2015, when the Supreme Court directed the update of the National Register of Citizens in Assam, he started volunteering in Lower Assam to assist persons applying for inclusion in the National Register of Citizens, as well as those charged as suspected foreigners in the foreigners' tribunals. Iftikar has travelled across Lower Assam, assisting persons in procuring documents and working with lawyers and ensuring people struggling to prove their citizenship get effective legal aid. He's working on creating access to legal aid by conducting awareness and empowerment camps at the community level and by training other paralegal volunteers. And I think his presentation today is now going to focus on the added complication of flooding in that state caused by climate change and how this compounds existing problems with access to legal aid and documentation. And today he's going to be assisted with interpretation into English by Angshuman Choudhury, who is a doctoral candidate in Comparative Asian Studies jointly at the National University of Singapore and King's College London. Previously, he was an associate fellow at the Centre for Policy Research in New Delhi. He is a co-founding member of the Right to Nationality and Citizenship Network and sits on the board of the Trustees of Development and Justice Initiative, a New Delhi-based NGO that works with asylum seekers and citizenship-affected communities across India. So thanks so much to both of you for working together to prepare this presentation. And over to you, Iftikar. Thank you. You can share your screen, or Angshuman, you can share the presentation. Thank you.
थैंक यू राधा जी। मैं इफ्तिकार हूँ। मैं असम से, आपने बोल ही दिया मेरे बारे में। मैं जिस टाइम में सोता था तो उसी टाइम से मैं सिटीजनशिप के इसका जो फॉरेनर है, फॉरेनर वो वर्ड जो विदेशी कहते हैं, उस शब्द से मैं जुड़ा हूँ। जैसे जैसे मैं बड़ा हुआ जैसे मुझे भी ये महसूस था कि ये फॉरेनर कहाँ से शुरू होते हैं, फॉरेनर कहाँ मिलते हैं, ये मैं ढूंढते ढूंढते आज भी मैं कोई भी फॉरेनर को अभी नहीं मिला असम में। जो मिला है, जो पासपोर्ट लेके थे उसी को ही मैंने मिला।
Since I've been working on the foreigner, sorry, am I audible? Yes. Since I was small, I've been working on this foreigner issue, which is always framed in the language of Bideshi. Bideshi means foreigner in both Assamese and Bengali. And as I started to grow up, I wanted to find who this foreigner is in Assam, and I could never find a foreigner in Assam.
तो 2015 में जो एनआरसी शुरू हुआ था, मैं एनआरसी का जो फॉर्म फिलअप करना, लोगों को मदद करना, उस काम में मैं जुड़ा था। धीरे धीरे जो फ्लड इफेक्टेड एरिया है, जो ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर है, जो फ्लड इफेक्टेड एरिया है, उसमें लोगों को मदद करना, उसको जो लाइफ स्टॉक है, उसका जो वो कैसे वहाँ पे रह सकते हैं, उसको मैं हेल्प करना काम किया। और ऐसे करते करते मैं डिस्ट्रिक्ट लीगल सर्विस अथॉरिटी, हाई कोर्ट एडवोकेट्स और डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के साथ मिलके फिर धीरे धीरे आते आते जो वहाँ एशिया का सबसे लार्जेस्ट डिटेंशन कैंप, मतलब जो ट्रांजिट कैंप कहते हैं, उसमें मैं अभी काम कर रहा हूँ, लोगों को मदद कर रहा हूँ जो क्लाइमेट इफेक्टेड के वजह से उसको फॉरेनर डिक्लेयर करते हैं और उसको डिटेंशन कैंप भेजते हैं। तो फिर डिटेंशन कैंप में मैं अभी काम कर रहा हूँ।
Since 2015, I have been working with those who have been affected by the National Register of Citizens updation process, the NRC updation process. And subsequently, I started working with those who have been affected by both the NRC process and floods, including, assisting them in restoring the livestock, who have lost the livestock and other livelihood. And following this, I've been working with the District Legal Service Authority, the High Courts, the High Court of Assam, and the district administrations, local district administrations, and eventually with what is now Asia's largest detention camp for foreigners, so-called foreigners in Assam, which is now known as transit camp. So now I've been working with, help providing support with those who are detained in this quote-unquote transit camp.
मैं आपको अभी जो क्लाइमेट चेंज के इफेक्टेड एक स्टोरी जो है आपको ये जो स्क्रीन पे जो दिखा रहा है, ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर का जो असम नॉर्थ ईस्ट इंडिया का जो रिवर कैसे आते हैं चाइना होकर, वो दिखा जा रहा है। नेक्स्ट स्लाइड। और जो आपको जो स्क्रीन पे दिखा जा रहा है, तो ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर जो था वो पहले 2 किलोमीटर 1950 में अर्थक्वेक होने का पहले ये ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर था 2 किलोमीटर था, अभी ये हो गया है 16 किलोमीटर। और बीच में जो 1950 से अभी तक लगभग 4000 विलेजेस रिवेरेशन में चला गया है, और वहाँ का 1000 विलेजेस का कोई नाम निशानी नहीं है। और आपको जो छोटा छोटा जो राउंड दिखा रहा है वो रिवर आइलैंड है ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर का, जिसको हम लोग सौर कहते हैं। और ये
This map shows the Brahmaputra river system in Assam, which flows from China into India through Arunachal and Assam. And this map shows the different sort of river islands, which are locally known as chors, which are created, by land erosion and other processes. In 1950, the breadth of the river was 2 kilometers, and the current breadth of the river is 16 kilometers. So that's the level of expansion that has happened over the last more than half a decade.
और पहले 4000 अभी 4000 villages
Sorry. Let me say that. Yeah, 4,000 in the process. Around 4,000 villages have nearly disappeared due to river erosion during this period.
ऐसे कर मैं अभी नेक्स्ट स्लाइड। अभी जो 2012 में ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर का जो मतलब ट्रिब्यूटरी रिवर से उसका फ्लड के लिए बरपेटा डिस्ट्रिक्ट में ही आपका 77% जो वो है वो इफेक्टेड हुआ था, और 94% हाउसहोल्ड वो इफेक्टेड हुआ था लैंड इरोजन में। और आपका 2012 में 2.9 नियर बाय 2.9 मिलियन पीपल वो लोग फ्लड इफेक्टेड हुआ था। और 2022 में ही 5.5 नियर बाय 5.5 मिलियन पीपल फ्लड और रिवर इरोजन से इफेक्टेड हुआ था, और उसमें 30 डिस्ट्रिक्ट सबसे ज्यादा इफेक्ट। और जो है ये पहले से बढ़ता हुआ आ रहा है, रिवर इरोजन का जो वो है पहले से बहुत बढ़ता हुआ आ रहा है।
So as you can see from the data, the extent of river erosion has just been increasing over the last few decades. In the EPW 2012 survey, as you can see, 77% of the households in Barpeta district, which also happens to be a citizenship crisis hotspot, have suffered from land erosion. And 94% of the households have lost their lands. In the 2012 floods, approximately 2.9 million people were affected. And in 2022 alone, nearly 5.5 million people were affected by the floods and displaced, and as a result were displaced. So as you can see, the extent of the displacement has just been increasing due to the floods.
मैं अभी एक स्टोरी के बारे में बताना चाहता हूँ, वो है मोमिरन नेसा, जो ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर के रिवर आइलैंड में रहते हैं। वो नियर बाय 10 साल ये डिटेंशन कैंप में रहा था, क्योंकि मोमिरन नेसा जिस शहर में रहते थे वो रिवर इरोजन में चला जाने के बाद वो दूसरा शहर में गया था। वहाँ पे उसका अगेंस्ट में डाउटफुल सिटीजनशिप का केस और 45 में उसका मार्क हुआ था।
So I'm going to tell you about the story of Mamirun Nessa, who was detained for 10 years, was in a detention camp for 10 years. Now, she had to move from one riverine island or chor to another chor, precisely because of flood-related displacement. And when she moved from one chor to the other chor, she lost her land documents, which is how she ended up being detained.
हाँ, जो मोमिरन नेसा के उसको मालूम ही नहीं था, जो उसको कोर्ट से जो नोटिस जाते हैं, जो इलेक्शन ऑफिसर बॉर्डर पुलिस जो नोटिस भेजते हैं, एफटी से जो नोटिस जाते हैं, उसको नहीं मिला। फिर उसको एक्स पार्टी जजमेंट दिया गया। एक्स पार्टी जजमेंट होने के बाद फिर उसको मालूम नहीं पड़ा। बाद में अचानक से पुलिस एक दिन उसका घर में चला गया, जाके उसका 2 साल का उसका बेटे को खिला रहे थे खाना। फिर पुलिस गया, पुलिस उसको पकड़ के पुलिस स्टेशन लेके आया, फिर उसको डिटेंशन कैंप भेज दिया।
Okay. She did not know about the fact that she had been served a notice by the border police regarding her doubtful citizenship, so-called supposedly doubtful citizenship status, But in an ex parte judgment, which is a judgment in her absence, she was declared an illegal immigrant or an illegal foreigner. And one fine day, the police abruptly appeared on her doorsteps and apprehended her while she was feeding her 2-year-old kid. Throughout this entire process, she was caught unaware and had no idea of what had happened and why she was detained.
फिर उसको डिटेंशन कैंप में लेके गया और जिस टाइम उसको लेके गया था उस टाइम वो प्रेग्नेंट थी और अचानक से उसको एक इंजेक्शन दिया गया और इंजेक्शन के बाद वो बच्चा वो मरा हुआ जन्म लिया.
When she was taken to the detention camp, she was pregnant, and as she has claimed also in this documentary that she was given a certain injection likely to abort the kid, and she ended up giving birth to a stillborn kid in the detention camp.
ऐसे करके उसका 10 साल चला गया डिटेंशन कैंप में. फिर 10 साल बाद जो 2019 में जो जजमेंट निकला था उस जजमेंट से उसको हम लोगों ने मदद करके डेवलपमेंट जस्टिस इनिशिएटिव के साथ मिलकर मदद करने से उसको निकल के लेके आया था बेलर वगैरह देके. फिर आने के बाद जो उसका 2 साल का बेटे को घर पे छोड़ के गया था वो बेटा मामी को पसंद नहीं रहा था, मामी बेटा को पसंद नहीं रहा था क्योंकि उन लोगों के साथ ये 10 साल में मुलाकात ही नहीं हुआ था.
So after she was taken to detention camp, she spent 10 years in the camp, and in 2019 she was released after Supreme Court judgment. And with the help of Development and Justice Initiative, we were able to release her. We were able to ensure her bail from get a release from the detention camp. But when she returned to her home, her 2-year-old kid, which she had left when she had left her home, the kid was 2-year-old. The kid could no longer recognize the mother, and the mother could no longer recognize the kid after she reached home from the detention camp.
फिर उसको बेटा को बोला ये तुम्हारा मामी है, ये तुम्हारा ये बेटा है. फिर वो बहुत खुश था, बहुत सालों बाद उस खुद का बेटे को मिला. फिर उसने बोला मेरा हस्बैंड कहाँ है, तो वो हस्बैंड को मिलने के लिए बहुत एक्साइटेड थे क्योंकि ये 10 साल में उसको हस्बैंड को नहीं मिला. और हस्बैंड मुझे पहले बोलते थे आप उनको निकल के लेकर मुझे उनसे बात करना है क्योंकि मैं डिटेंशन के आपको उसके मिलने से मैं जिंदा वापस नहीं आऊंगा, ऐसे कर हस्बैंड बोलते थे. लेकिन जैसे जैसे वो निकल के वो बोला मुझे भी हस्बैंड से मिलना है, हस्बैंड क्यों नहीं आया, मेरा हस्बैंड मुझे मिलने के लिए क्यों नहीं आया. लेकिन ये बदनसीब ये था उसका हस्बैंड वो निकल के आने के 6 महीने पहले उसका डेथ हो गया था. लेकिन उसका हस्बैंड को मतलब मोमेन नेसा से बात करने का जो बात था वो हो नहीं पाया और मोमेन नेसा का हस्बैंड का वो मिलने का जो उम्मीद लेके निकल के आए थे वो भी उसको पूरा नहीं हुआ.
So after she came out of the detention camp, she was very keen to meet her husband, and her husband had also been insisting on meeting her in the detention camp and also meeting her once after she's released. But when she returned and she was looking for her husband, she later realized that her husband had passed away just 6 months prior to her release from the detention center.
तो अब फिर वो अचानक से सेंसलेस हो गया और फिर वो आने के बाद उसका जो उम्मीद था वो ऐसे करके ये उसका जो ग्रैंडफादर था वो ग्रैंडफादर 1951 एनआरसी में उसका नाम है ग्रैंडफादर का और उसका वोटर लिस्ट में सिर्फ नेम का कुछ स्टाफ स्पेलिंग का चेंजेस के वजह से उसको फॉरेनर डिक्लेयर किया गया है. और उसको जो न्याय मिलना था, ये जो फ्लड इफेक्टेड एरिया है ब्रह्मपुत्र रिवर का, ये क्लाइमेट चेंज के वजह से उसका अगेंस्ट में केसेस रजिस्टर हुआ क्योंकि उसको माइग्रेट करना पड़ता है. इस वजह से उसको इस टाइप से उस टाइप जाना पड़ता है. और मोमियन नशा जो है अभी उसको हर वीक पुलिस स्टेशन आना पड़ता है और पुलिस स्टेशन में उनको हाजिरा लगाना पड़ता है, उसको साइन करना पड़ता है. और जो कोविड-19 का जो पीरियड था उस टाइम पे भी उसको 2 आवर्स पैदल आना पड़ता था, 2 आवर्स पैदल उसका घर जाना पड़ता था और उसका अभी कोई ब्रेड अर्नर नहीं है. और आप सोचिए ये क्लाइमेट चेंज के वजह से ही इनके साथ ये सिटीजनशिप का मुद्दा हुआ है.
Her grandfather's name was in the 1951 National Register of Citizens, but she was declared a foreigner because of a minor spelling error. But I also want to emphasize the point that all of this is also intrinsically linked to the fact that she was displaced because of climate change induced floods in that sense. and she has to now report to the police station every week to sign a certain register. And even during the COVID-19 pandemic, when most of us were relegated to our homes, she had to visit the police station once every week. And because there's no other breadwinner at her home, she was facing extreme difficulties because of that.
ऐसा असम में हर कोने में ऐसा स्टोरी है। मैं राजकुमार मंडल के बारे में बताना चाहता हूँ। राजकुमार मंडल भी ऐसा एक शख्स था। वो पहले अपर असम में ये काम करने के लिए जाते थे, वहीं पे उसका अगेंस्ट में केस रजिस्टर हो गया। फॉरेनर का मतलब बॉर्डर पुलिस उसका अगेंस्ट में केस रजिस्टर कर दिया। और उसके साथ जो बसना वाला बीबी है, ये भी राजकुमार मंडल का वाइफ है, उसका नाम पे भी केस रजिस्टर हुआ था। क्योंकि जो फीमेल है उसको प्रूफ करने में, लिंकेज प्रूफ करने में सबसे ज्यादा दिक्कत होता है। और ऐसे करके राजकुमार मंडल भी फोर्स डिटेंशन कैंप में था। और जो बसना वाला मंडल है, इंडियन डिक्लेयर होने के बाद भी उसको बॉर्डर पुलिस में उसका वो इंडियन बना है करके वो एंट्री उतारा नहीं था। फिर उसको पकड़ के लेके गए थे, उसको भी 4 डे डिटेंशन कैंप में उसको भी रहना पड़ा।
This is another case of Rajkumar Mandal and Basana. Rajkumar Mandal was used to work as a laborer in Upper Assam, and he was detained after being declared an illegal immigrant. But his wife, was detained by the police, despite being declared an Indian, had to spend a few days in a detention center. And women especially face difficulty proving the linkages or proving their credentials, citizenship credentials over men.
मेरा जो सबसे ज्यादा काम होता है उसका जो डॉक्यूमेंट निकलना और उनका जो गरीब लोग है उनको जो प्रमोटर रिवाइव रीजन में जो स्टाफ वहां पे चला जाता है, दूसरे जगह पे चला जाता है। फिर उसको मतलब कहाँ से क्या निकलेगा, कैसे वो लिंकेज प्रूफ करेगा, उसमें मेरा सबसे ज्यादा जिम्मेदारी रहता है। कैसे उसको अच्छा एडवोकेट के पास जाना है, कैसे उसको डिस्ट्रिक्ट लीगल सर्विस अथॉरिटी का जुड़ सकते हैं, कैसे इसको डिस्ट्रिक्ट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन का मिलकर उसको जो डॉक्यूमेंट रिवाइवेशन की वजह से कोई जो फायर बर्निंग के वजह से उसका घर में चला जाता है, उनको कैसे फिर नया करके निकाल सकते हैं ऑफिस से। तो उसमें मैं ज्यादा काम करता हूँ।
A lot of my work is focused on precisely this, which is providing legal aid and documentary assistance to people who are forcibly displaced due to various factors, including river erosion. So my focus is on trying to help them understand how to collect all the relevant documents, which they can then use to prove their citizenship in front of one of the foreigner tribunals.
और मैं जिस टाइम पे एनआरसी का काम शुरू हुआ था, उस टाइम पे मैं उन लोगों को कौन सा डॉक्यूमेंट देना, कैसे क्या फाइल करना है, क्या क्या उसको विटनेसेस प्रोड्यूस करना, उसमें मैं उन लोगों को मदद करते थे। और तो ये है मेरा।
And during the NRC process, when the NRC updation process was going on, I used to, a lot of my work focused on helping people collect the necessary documents to be able to register themselves for the NRC.
अभी जो मेरा जो बोलना जो एनआरसी प्रोसेस शुरू था, वहाँ पे 16,200 करोड़ पैसा खर्च हुआ था। और जो एक्सक्लूडेड था 55,000 गवर्नमेंट जो एम्प्लॉय थे वो उसमें एक्सक्लूडेड है, उसका जो कॉस्ट है वो एक्सक्लूडेड है। इतना खर्चा करने के बाद 1.9 मिलियन पीपल एक्सक्लूडेड हुआ था। लेकिन उसमें जो था उसमें पेरेंट्स का नाम आया है, बेटा बेटी का नाम नहीं है। ऐसे करके 1.9 मिलियन पीपल एक्सक्लूडेड है। अभी जो मुझे जो मानना है, तो जो लोग आपका जो लोग मुझे जो मानना है, जो लोग अभी एनआरसी से एक्सक्लूडेड है वो लोग इंडियन ही है। उसको क्लाइमेट रिफ्यूजी और जो रिवर इरोजन का वजह से इस तरफ उस तरफ और जो मार्जिनलाइज्ड कम्युनिटी जो रिवर साइड में रहते हैं, उन लोगों को टारगेट करके ही इसको फोकस कर रहा है। और उसका अभी तक ये मान्यता नहीं दिया गवर्नमेंट में।
I want to emphasize the fact that a lot of the marginalized communities who live along these riverine areas, which are at the very margins of the state geography, I want to argue, I want to highlight that the state has barely focused on these communities who are, as I said, routinely displaced by these climate disasters. So, the state needs to focus on these particular communities.
और इसमें
ये वाला जो हेडलाइन है इसके बारे में बोलना चाहते हो?
हाँ हाँ, जो एनआरसी हेडलाइन फैमिली स्टैंडर्ड फ्लड स्टे होम, तो जो लोग हैं उसमें कोई लोग वहां से निकल के नहीं आना चाहता है, जैसे फ्लड हो गया और उसका वोटर लिस्ट में उसका नाम भी चेंज नहीं करता, दूसरे जगह पे नहीं लेके जाना चाहता है, क्योंकि वो जाने से उसका अगेंस्ट में बॉर्डर पुलिस फिर उसका अगेंस्ट में केस रजिस्टर कर देते हैं। इसी वजह से वो लोग जहाँ पे रहते हैं, फ्लड हो गया कुछ भी हो तो वो उसी जगह में वो लोग रहने के लिए पसंद करता है।
So as you can see in this headline by the Indian Express, a lot of people during the NRC process who were stranded in floods, they didn't want to be rescued because in such cases, when they're rescued, they're taken away from the homesteads, and in the process, they lose their rootedness, or they lose their linkage to their homes, and hence they fail to prove their citizenship. So a lot of people chose to be stranded in the floods rather than being rescued.
इसमें ये भी है, जो कोई लोग वोटर लिस्ट में नाम ट्रांसफर नहीं इसलिए करने से उसको तो सिटीजन केसेस आ सकते हैं, और उसके वजह से जो गवर्नमेंट जो उसको बेनिफिट मिलना है वो भी उन लोगों को नहीं मिलते हैं, क्योंकि वो लोग रहते हैं दूसरे जगह पे, अब वोटर लिस्ट में नाम है दूसरे जगह पे की। तो ये सबसे बड़ा क्लाइमेट रिफ्यूजी बोल सकते हैं आप, उनका सबसे बड़ा डिग्निटी जो है उसके ऊपर हार्म हो रहा है।
Because of this movement also, they lose their names in the particular voter list in that area, after which they fail to also receive government subsidies and any kind of state support. So this kind of climate change related movement ultimately ends up harming their right to life and dignity also.
मैं अभी यही करना चाहता हूँ, जो यूनिसेयर है और जो गवर्नमेंट है, क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट को उसको पॉजिटिवली देखना चाहिए, क्योंकि ये इंडियन सिटीजन है। इंडियन सिटीजन को कोई भी किसी भी कारण उसको फॉरेनर का जो टैगलाइन है उसको लगाना नहीं चाहिए। और जो डी वोटर है, वर्ल्ड में मेरा जो जानकारी है, वर्ल्ड में किसी जगह पे डाउटफुल वोटर का कोई प्रोविजन नहीं, सिर्फ असम में ही है। इसका ऊपर यूनिसेयर को बात करना चाहिए, क्योंकि ये एक बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है जिसका ऊपर ये सिटीजन केसेस लगता है, उसको मालूम होता है वो कैसे उसको झेलता है। और डिटेंशन कैंप में भी मैं काम करता हूँ, तो डिटेंशन कैंप में भी जो यूनिसेयर कार्ड रहने वाला लोग है, जो रोहिंग्या लोगों को डिपोर्ट करने के वजह से वो दिल्ली जाने का टाइम पे, दिल्ली से वो आने के टाइम पे उसको अरेस्ट किया गया था, तो जो डिटेंशन कैंप में है उन लोग का यूनिसेयर कार्ड है, उसके बावजूद भी उसको ट्रांजिट कैंप से उसको सर्व नहीं रहा, यूनिसेयर को भी मान्यता नहीं दे रहा है ये असम गवर्नमेंट या सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट।
I feel the UNHCR should emphasize on the fact that most of these people are actually Indian citizens. They are not illegal foreigners, but they are declared illegal foreigners because of a faulty system. And it's only in Assam that we have a category called doubtful voter, which doesn't exist anywhere else. So the UNHCR needs to advocate and emphasize that in front of the government. And even in the detention camps, many of the detainees have UNHCR refugee cards, but the Assam state government has not been upholding the UNHCR refugee cards, or not been giving due recognition to those UNHCR cards. So UNHCR needs to pay attention to this.
और मैं यही रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहता हूँ, क्योंकि असम में अभी तक कोई फ्लड इवेक्शन और जो हिस्ट्री है, तो हिस्ट्री को अभी बदलना चाह रहे हैं, तो जो हिस्ट्री है, हिस्ट्री से रिलेटेड करके फ्लड इवेक्शन और जो फॉरेनर जो इशू है, तो उसका ऊपर कोई ऐसा कोई सख्त ये डाटा नहीं है। तो मैं रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहता हूँ जो आपका जो इंस्टीट्यूट है और इंस्टीट्यूट को, कि इसमें एक डाटाबेस बना के जो हमारा कम्युनिटी है उसको आप जस्टिफिकेशन दीजिए। ये मेरा कम्युनिटी से आप जितना भी हो उन लोगों को मैं रिक्वेस्ट है।
Finally, I would request your institute to probably also help us better understand the exact relationship between flood evictions and disaster related events and the foreigner issue through evidence and data. This is something that is hugely lacking in Assam, especially in a historical context also. So in order for my community to get justice, we need better understanding, evidence-based understanding of the relationship between flood, eviction, and other climate events, and the foreigner crisis.
और मैं ये भी चाहता हूँ जो हमारा अभी हम लोग जो भी पैरालीगल बोलिए जो क्लाइमेट के साथ हम लोग जुड़ के उन लोगों को मदद कर रहे हैं उन लोगों को आप लोगों को प्लेटफॉर्म के साथ हम लोग को जुड़िए और हम लोगों को और वर्ल्ड में क्या हो रहा है हम लोगों को और जानकारी मिलने में मदद कीजिए और आप लोगों का सेंटर हम लोग को विजिट कराइए जिसमें हम लोगों को बहुत मदद होगा.
We would also want to request you to provide our community and representatives of our community exposure to other contexts of citizenship and disasters, and probably facilitate some kind of exposure visit so that we get to know the larger context of what's happening across the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iftikar, and thank you, Angshuman, for the fantastic job with interpreting. And notwithstanding the two people speaking, you still made it in good time. So thanks so much for condensing what is obviously a huge issue and a really clear example. I think, Aashish, you talked about, climate change as a threat multiplier, showing how there's sort of this intersection between the climate change related event, but also discrimination and how that can be kind of really weaponized in a way in this context where people are already made vulnerable because of the impacts of climate change. So really clear illustrations, and thank you for the examples and those very difficult stories that you shared as well, Iftikar. We have one more presentation left, and then I'm sure that there will be some questions. So I'm going to pass over to Helen B now. So Helen is the Asia Pacific lead for migration and displacement with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. She's based in the IFRC's regional office in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Helen joined the IFRC in 2017 and provides technical, strategic and operational support to Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies as their humanitarian work relates to migration and displacement. She's an anthropologist with a personal passion for raising awareness of the humanitarian and environmental impacts of statelessness, and she wrote her master's thesis on the intersection of statelessness, participation and natural resource management in 2013, based on a decade of ethnographic exposure amongst the Bad Lao community in the Malaysian part of Borneo. Please make Helen very welcome. Helen, over to you.
Thanks very much, Radha, and hello again, everybody. And I'd also like to express my thanks to the previous two speakers for really humanizing this incredibly complex and pertinent issue so well. Before I now offer some insights into the way that the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies is looking at the changing climate, how it relates to disasters, and also particularly in relation to my work, people who are on the move or who have moved internally or across borders. And we're doing some research at the moment, which is why Radha invited me to join this, because I mean, I will say that I feel quite in awe of the esteemed academics and researchers amongst us today, because I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as a researcher, but we are trying to do some research in order to better inform our humanitarian action. So let me try to move the slides. There we are. I never want to start a presentation assuming that the IFRC and the Red Cross and the Red Crescent is necessarily known to everybody or understood. So just to set out at the beginning what the IFRC is, we say the world's largest humanitarian network. It's a network that's comprised of 191 Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies working in their national contexts. And they're made up of volunteers, staff as well, but primarily community-based volunteers working in and with and who originate from their own communities. We're a humanitarian network with the core mission to alleviate human suffering, protect life and health, and uphold human dignity. As humanitarians, we're guided by our fundamental principles. This relates particularly to our neutrality, to our impartiality, independence, and a strictly humanitarian approach to our work, guided by needs and vulnerabilities. We have a humanitarian mandate. As I said, we take no positions exactly on whether there should be more or less movement, but looking at the humanitarian needs and the consequences of movements. And working to our strengths is linking this local to global and also global back to local action around the globe. We're currently working within our strategy for the present decade that has 5 strategic priorities. The first is on climate and environmental crisis. The second is on evolving crises, particularly looking at complex and protracted crises in relation to disasters. The third is on the growing gaps in health and well-being. The fourth on migration and displacement, and the fifth on what we describe as values, power, and inclusion. So as you'll appreciate, these are, of course, interlinked, intersecting, and reflect what we see, or at least what was seen when Strategy 2030 was being conceived as the largest global humanitarian challenges. The strategy itself, and I've pulled out a quote here, clearly articulates the links between climate change, migration and displacement. And even back in, I'm guessing this was 2019 when the strategy was first being drafted, we recognized the impacts of the climate crisis as a growing reality for millions of people, as well as the new and unexpected health threats. This was even before COVID, that are driving migration and displacement. And at that time, we were saying a time when compassion for people on the move is at an all-time low. Now, unfortunately, I would argue that maybe we've seen this compassion drop even lower. And I just wanted to step back a couple of years before to 2018, when we published a report that we publish periodically, every 4 years actually, that was focused on who is left out of humanitarian action and why. And I still feel that this is a very, very relevant resource for us to look at. It was a year after I joined the Federation, and I was able to review an early draft of the World Disasters Report and to offer suggestions of where we might make stronger links with statelessness in this. The report itself drew out 5 particular areas where people might be left out of humanitarian action due to being out of sight, due to being out of reach, like physically out of reach, due to being out of the loop or sort of knowingly or unintentionally excluded, being out of money, or deprioritized when it's necessary to do prioritization, or now a lot of rationalization for prioritizing our work, and being out of scope, not seen as being relevant to the humanitarian sector. I also just wanted to mention that whilst we are embarking on new research that I will talk about a little bit more in detail, there is an existing body of work and evidence that we've been gathering, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region as it relates to disasters and displacement and in the face of the climate crisis. So we have collected case studies, and we've done some in-depth work with national societies on this topic. And this is really what we're building on. So these are all publicly available resources, and they provide some insights into how national societies are working at their local levels. And that was the start of really trying to understand what the bigger picture is. As I mentioned, climate and environmental crises is one of our 5 major priorities at the moment, and we have a global program focused on climate resilience. I'm not going to go into great detail on this, but I really just wanted to mention that you'll see the third pillar here, addressing climate displacement, is really a very strong part of this, recognizing the links between displacement and climate, and supporting people to adapt and to strengthen their resilience, using our volunteer base and using what we have through the volunteers and the national societies working in their local level, in terms of an understanding of some local realities. Something else to mention is the work that we're doing to try to influence policy and advocacy outcomes. And each of the national societies in their respective national contexts are auxiliaries to their public authorities. Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies are not part of the government, they're independent, but they're also not NGOs in the sense of working in the NGO space, but in this unique and very privileged position of being auxiliaries to their public authorities in the humanitarian field. And so this is particularly important when it comes to our responsibility to try to influence better humanitarian outcomes, for all, irrespective of status, of any other category or, identity aspect. Humanitarian diplomacy is about seeking better outcomes for all, and working at many levels to do this, but it's particularly about encouraging governments to adopt policies, and so that these policies can be put into practice for better outcomes. We're actually working a lot at the moment in the process that's leading up to the draft of a treaty on protection of persons in disasters. So through the national societies, we're working with states to try to ensure that this is a very strong treaty. And I actually have not seen the draft treaty, but I'm going to get a hold of it and do a very thorough search on references to citizenship and statelessness in that, and see if there might be ways that we could perhaps further strengthen that. So the research that we have recently embarked on, linked to that global focus on strengthening climate resilience and addressing climate-related displacement, is within a bigger vision, and perhaps one that we can, or all of us on this call, maybe see something of the work that you're doing in this. I mean, our vision is really that, in the face of the climate crisis, in the face of disasters, be they slow onset or sudden onset disasters, and of course disasters that are not climate induced, such as earthquakes, we want people to be supported, to remain resilient, to adapt, to move out of harm's way through choice, not through necessity, because we know that the vast majority of people would rather not move. But when people do have to move, that their humanitarian needs and any conditions of vulnerability, risks that they face in situations of displacement are reduced, and that, when they have had to move, eventually people can reestablish their lives, either return or relocate, but reestablish a safe, dignified life, and not just an existence, but a life in which one can thrive and contribute to society. So the research, and I'd like to say now that this is research that's being done not just in the Asia-Pacific region, but also in Africa and also in the Americas. So we have 3 pieces of regional research ongoing at the moment. And the research is being led by an excellent colleague who's working as a consultant for the IFRC at the moment. Her name is Sophie Offner. And she's done extensive work with many other organizations, including PDD and IOM, and several others in this area. So we were really, really glad that she was able to join us and take the lead in this research. But she wasn't able to join today, unfortunately. And so we're doing this research with the aim to strengthen our own efforts. I mean, this is research that's looking at us as the IFRC network, and what we are doing related to climate-related movements to support our our membership, and our membership are our national societies, so in turn that they can support their communities. To strengthen their action, we know that a lot is going on already, but to do that more strongly, but recognizing that they are each working in very distinct contexts, they have distinct capacities, the needs vary, and national societies are not all identical in any way. We've taken a mixed methods approach, and we've been working remotely in this project. First of all, looking at what literature exists, both our internal resources and the immense amount of literature that's available looking at climate and disaster displacement, but particularly looking at the role of humanitarian organizations. We've administered a lot of questionnaires and surveys to seek the input from our national societies to draw this picture, to try to get an idea of the breadth, the scope, and the diversity of the way national societies work, in order to have more in-depth case studies that I'll talk about in a minute, to really shine a spotlight on how national societies are working. And Sophie and I and other colleagues, we conducted semi-structured interviews, both with our internal colleagues and with some key external stakeholders and partners as well. And we're now in the process of doing the data analysis to draw out what some of the challenges are, the gaps, but equally, where to recognize that there's good work being done and how we can then think through scaling up this action. This is just a quick overview of the structure of the report. The first section is really an overview of what displacement in the context of climate change in Asia Pacific looks like. What are the main hazards? What are the main situations, contexts, challenges? What's the law and policy framework? And then the second section looks in on national societies' actions, how they work sort of along the continuum of displacement, before, during, and after. What do they do in relation to preparedness for an impending disaster? What do they do in response, immediate response, and also longer term response, and then linking that to the recovery and longer term needs as well. So we gathered case studies from 21 Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies, and some national societies contributed more than one case study. That's why we have a total of 40 case studies. And it's an incredible diversity of case studies or spotlights that we've been able to draw out. It really illustrates the diversity compared to, if you're looking at, for example, the Samoa Red Cross, and what they're doing in the context of climate displacement, Bangladesh Red Crescent, Mongolia Red Cross. It's really incredibly rich, and I think, the reason we're doing this is because we did not find anywhere that there is this broader picture of the sort of more comprehensive work of our network globally, well, regionally, but then with the idea of this being presented globally. And we're going to use this for scaling up programmatic work, but also importantly for advocacy, seeking to influence, and to really, highlight what we believe is a very important added value that national societies and their volunteers can play in partnership and collaboration with others. So the research, as you'll appreciate, is not specifically looking at statelessness, but I do think that the findings that we have gathered so far, from those we can draw out areas where, statelessness, citizenship, and risks of losing nationality, or the particular risks of people who are stateless or at risk of statelessness are identified. And I'm not going to sort of speak to the obvious, but we know that our region has the highest number of disasters and that there's more disaster-related displacement than any other region in the world. These numbers are only getting bigger. There's a lot of multiple displacement, repeated displacement, protracted displacement. We also well understand the interconnectivity of climate disasters, conflict, violence poverty, marginality. I think it's this marginality that we really need to look at in our work. And that some of these consequences are irreversible, the permanent displacement that, puts people even more at risk. The evidence has shown that national societies do have an essential role as community-based organizations, and do and can more so be more involved in participatory action with affected people. Harnessing the local and indigenous knowledge, particularly when it comes to climate change. It's people at the forefront of it that can talk best about what they are observing and also participate in solutions and appropriate responses in the face of the climate crisis. And so, yeah, locally led action, helping people to adapt, to move and to recover. And all this requires sustained investment in all of these areas: risk reduction, adaptation, early action and preparedness, in order to strengthen durable and resilient recovery. So this is my penultimate slide, I think. I was thinking late last night about how to draw these links with statelessness. And I think many of these points have been raised by the previous two speakers as well. But, looking at the periods of displacement and the multiple situations where people are displaced more than once really is, increasing risks and vulnerabilities, which are exacerbated if someone is already at the margins of society or out of sight or overlooked. And we've got a particular finding from the case studies that climate change is disproportionately impacting people in informal urban settlements, and people in informal settlements, be they urban or rural, are going to be more exposed to the impacts of climate and disasters. They already have limited or next to no access to basic services. Food insecurity, inhibits ability to cope, leading to sort of negative coping strategies. People with disabilities are already at a disproportionate risk. So yeah, all of these factors are intersectional. So yeah, heightened exposure to health and other risks. So it's all interconnected basically, and we already know that there are barriers. So what I really want to think more about is, what is it about statelessness that needs to be better understood to understand disproportionate impacts, and at the same time how moving can be a lifeline for people impacted by climate impacts, as we heard about earlier, but that through moving, this is also putting people at a greater risk of losing nationality if they are unable to keep their documents with them, or they lose their tenure to land. And so even things like planned relocation that may be an effort to help people move out of harm's way in a dignified manner may not be considering what that means for somebody who's at risk of losing their nationality. So in summary, and what we're doing next, and maybe some thoughts for further research, what we have found, it does contribute to our strengthened evidence base of what national societies are doing. It provides us with a deeper understanding of the context, the gaps, and the needs. And it's going to help us strengthen our programmatic action and advocacy, including integrating local knowledge. But, and this is the big but, I really feel that statelessness is still a big blind spot for the humanitarian sector. And, I've talked about this before. I talked about it at the World Statelessness Forum last year, and I'm talking about it a lot internally within my organization. And so there's still a lot of work to be done, and it's not necessarily that it's that stateless people are excluded. It's this, I think, literally, it's not well understood, particularly amongst colleagues that work in the very traditional sectors of humanitarian work. What are the differentiated risks and vulnerabilities, and how do we understand needs, and therefore how can we have more tailored responses? And ultimately, addressing statelessness, which is a human rights issue, can reduce humanitarian impacts of climate change. And so, arguably it would make it a better outcome for everyone. I just wanted to explain this picture, if I may. It's just to show that the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society has a program called the Cyclone Preparedness Program that they are working in partnership with the public authorities and many other organizations to lead. But they're doing it around the country, but it's particularly critical in the Rohingya refugee camps of Cox's Bazar, where it's the volunteers, both Bangladeshis and Rohingya, who work in the cyclone preparedness to provide information and messages about impending cyclones. And so that really life-saving work is so critical. And I just love this picture because it's all women. So thank you. And I hope I haven't exceeded my time. And back to you, Radha.
Thank you very much for that, Helen, and a really interesting and different angle to all of this, because of course we're sort of thinking a lot about the prevention side, and one thing that our research into the work that needs to be done before we prepare these global recommendations has been a lot around the vulnerabilities of existing stateless populations, which is somehow a little bit, as you say, a blind spot. Everyone's very keen to avoid that scenario of statelessness arising as a result of climate change. But what about all of those people who are already sitting there, often in harm's way, and really making sure that, those kinds of issues are addressed? I mean, of course, addressing statelessness in and of itself would be a good way forward. But short of that, what else could be done? So thanks very much, Helen, for highlighting that. When will the report be out, do you think?
We're hoping by the end of April, and there's a trio with the Americas and Africa research reports together. But yes, it's in the final stages now.
Oh, fantastic. No, it'd be really interesting to look at some of the, actually, we will make these presentations available with the permission of the presenters. So when that happens, I'm particularly interested to look at your slide where you've kind of highlighted some of those links to statelessness, which are interesting to think about also for the purposes of the global recommendations. So on that note, I'd just like to thank everyone very much for joining. I'd like to thank Helen, Angshuman, Iftikar, and Aashish in particular for the time that they've taken to present today. And stay safe, everyone, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.